Hi, I'm Chad Hennings, and welcome to Forces of Character podcast. I'm excited for today's guest for pretty much selfish reasons. I have a former teammate of mine from the Air Force Academy Falcons who is going to join us today, but this guy went on to do extraordinary things in the Air Force. He ended up retiring as a 3-star general. He was superintendent at the Air Force Academy, and this guy now has one of my dream jobs that I can think of, being the director for the college football playoffs. So let's welcome our guest, Rich Clark. Rich,
Thanks,
hey,
Chad.
bud, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely, brother. I'm happy to do anything you ever want me to do.
No, well, I appreciate that. But, you know, to start off, one of the reasons why I was anxious to have you on is, you know, I want to learn a little more about yourself, kind of what makes you tick as a leader of character. You know, we kind of always start off with that foundational aspect of our lives growing up. So tell me a little bit about your family life growing up prior, you know, to you going to the Air Force Academy.
Sure. So first, thanks for having me. This is pretty awesome to be here with you right now. 40 years ago, who would have thought, right?
Exactly.
But here we are.
Exactly.
So growing up, I grew up in the Bay Area, Oakland, California. My mother was a single mom for many years, and then when she got remarried, we moved to Richmond, Virginia. And my stepdad got a job there. He was became eventually the superintendent of schools in Richmond. And, you know, being a kid with your dad being the superintendent in those schools was interesting. That's character development all in itself. And then I got recruited to go to the Air Force Academy from there. Ken Hatfield came. He was our coach right before you got there. And came to my house, visited my mom. I was going to go to another school, William and Mary, in Virginia, and Coach Hatfield told my mom, he said, just have him come see it. Just come see it, that's all. And my mom was like, he's so nice, just go, it's free. I was like, okay. And I went, and I will tell you, I fell in love with the place. I wanted to be a pilot. It was a dream that I had, not necessarily a military pilot at the time, but I wanted to fly. And I just got hooked at the Air Force Academy, and I really had no idea what I was getting into. I don't think. I saw the external, the beauty of the place, the mountains in Colorado. I had no idea about the development that I would get there. And that was a life changer. That hour and a half that he spent with my family changed everything for me. And of course, playing football there was probably the best development I could have had in coordination with what the Academy gives you. And then the rest is history.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said, because I had a high school football coach that totally changed the trajectory of my life. You know, coaches. I mean, I don't think in our society today we give coaches enough credit for the impact that they have on so many young people. But you mentioned your mom, you know, your dad. Who did you have other, like, high school coaches? Who were your mentors growing up? Who had an impact on your life to kind of help you hone who Rich Clark is today?
Sure. Well, my parents, of course. You know, my mom is strong. I mean, she's 81 and she still runs 2 bakeries, two nothing but cake bakeries, right? She's 81. My dad, my stepdad in particular, really raised me, and a great leader in his own right. But then coaches, you know, Ken Hatfield, Fisher DeBerry. My high school coaches coming up, Frank Butts was a great coach. Leroy Jones was a great high school coach. These people, you know, because they're teaching you lessons that you put into practice every day on the practice field, or on the field on Friday night or Saturday afternoon, whenever it might be. And you just can't trade those kind of practical lessons. And I always said, football is a microcosm of life. You go through every emotion, every opportunity to overcome adversity, teamwork, integrity, all those things that we hold dear. You live it in football.
Amen to that. You know, I always often say too that, you know, for a leadership laboratory, athletics is a great leadership laboratory. You learn the aspects of commitment, of dedication, resiliency, you know, hard work, team sports, et cetera. You know, and football, I think, is selfishly the pinnacle of that, the apex of that. That's right. But your time you're not the Air Force Academy. Who were your big influences? I know that you mentioned the coaches, but did you have anybody outside of that, an AOC, Air Officer Commanding, or other teammates, upperclassmen that had an impact on you?
Sure. Obviously, I think my coaches had the Coach DeBerry and Coach Hatfield in particular had a huge impact on me. They really, I would hold them up as the pinnacle of the examples that I had there. But there was also some, because my faith is really important to me. And I had some folks, Daryl Maston, I don't know if you remember him, but he was the lead of our Fellowship of Christian Athletes group. And I will say that his influence on me was probably as strong as any influence that I had, because that's a time in your life where you really are developing, and I'm developing as a leader, but then there's that foundation of my faith that really, I think, was the basis for who I am as a man. It is the basis of who I am as a man. That's the most important thing in my life, is my relationship with God. And Daryl Maston helped me to understand that foundation exists in every aspect of your life.
Real quick, Daryl Maston story. I credit him with a lot of my technique between my senior year, where my senior year I had the breakout year. Daryl was helping Tom Miller with coaching technique during camp. I mean, just footwork and stuff. He was a bear. Wouldn't take any, would excellence, the smallest amount of detail, where he really honed my skill. And I know a lot. You mentioned his name, and I thought, man, that's a blast from the past.
Just awesome. He was a center at the Air Force Academy.
Yeah.
So, footwork was
everything.
Key to him, right?
Was key to him.
He was, but it was more than footwork. It was about your faith and who you are and who you're going to be in your life. And, from footwork to faith, right? He did it all.
Amen. Well, a lot of people that are listening in too don't necessarily know or can appreciate the day-to-day aspects of going to a service academy. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that, how that honed who you were, because they inundate you with everything.
Right.
But just speak to that on the front end as a cadet. We'll get to the superintendent piece coming full circle later, but a day in the life, can you kind of go through that, how that helped you hone who you were as a person too?
Sure. Like football, the Air Force Academy is also a leadership laboratory. You go through things there that people can't even imagine a college student would voluntarily go through, right? And so I feel like it allowed you to take your leadership, even that you learned on the football field, but put it into other practical applications. How are you leading the people in your squadron? Peer leadership, right? Peer leadership is the hardest thing that any leader could ever have to face. And the Air Force Academy put you in that position where you had to guide your peers, people that are your friends, that when you tried to maybe tell them that they were doing wrong, maybe trying to make a correction, they might look at you and go, who are you? You're just like me. So you had to find other ways beyond just your personal authority, but more about your personal character and who you were to try to lead people. You couldn't rely on rank. We all had the same rank, but how else are you going to lead people? Are you only going to rely on sort of positional authority, or are you going to rely on your skills as a leader to help guide people in the right direction? And I think the Academy teaches you that in a way that you can't get anywhere else, and you did it every day, like you said. You lived it.
Yeah, amen. Well, and we also lived under a code of conduct, the honor code. We will not lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate anyone among us who does. You say that to kids, and particularly young kids that are coming up, why am I going to cheat? Turn my brother in.
Right.
He cheated on a test, or he plagiarized, or he did something where he compromised his integrity. Talk about why that is important, and why we do that in preparation, whatever example you want. When you get on active duty, you're flying a bomber, you're flying a fighter, where character is so important then.
Absolutely. So one of the things that when I was the superintendent, I would tell the cadets all the time, your integrity is the only thing that you have that only you can give away. Nobody can take your integrity. Nobody can talk you into giving it away. Only you can make that decision. And if you lose that, it might take you, a second to lose it. It takes you a lifetime to get it back. And so I think that the Academy, the honor code that you talk about, we had that instilled in us for 4 years. And for me, your integrity is the key thing in the military, because you cannot have lapses of integrity, especially when lives are on the line, your national security is on the line, and the things that you're entrusted with in the military that are so much bigger than you could ever imagine. But integrity is key when you're employing those kinds of things, and you as a leader are trying to lead people to employ those capabilities. They have to know that your integrity is right, that you're only doing it because it's the right reason. The thing that you're trying to talk people into doing is because you know it's right, and they know that you know it's right, and they're willing to follow you wherever you go. But if you lose that integrity, it is hard to get back, and you just can't give it away.
You know, this, what you kind of alluding to, is it's a mindset, it's a lifestyle. It's got to become a part of you that you own it. So, you know, we start, I mean, at the academy, you start at your freshman year, your fourth degree year going into that. But, you know, this is something as parents that, you know, you need to be instilling in your kids at a very young age, teaching them. You know, we'll kind of jump ahead a little bit here, but your experience, that kind of begs the question as the superintendent. You had a lot of kids that came in that didn't necessarily have that sense of honor, purpose, integrity, character. How did you go about instilling that in them at that point in time?
Yeah, no, Chad, that is the question, right? How do you get people to buy into a culture or to buy into ideals or values? And what I found was whenever I talked to the cadets, I always emphasized our core values in the Air Force: integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. But not just those things as core, because they are in you, right? We want those to be core to a person, but we also wanted to understand, what does that look like in practical action? You know, when it's at your core, maybe people don't actually see it, but when you put it into action, that's what we need. We need people that take those values. So for integrity first, we said a person that actually puts integrity first is a person that lives honorably. They live honorably in every aspect of their lives, whether it's their personal life, their professional life. They're always on display, and that honor comes out in everything that they do. Living honorably is the key to integrity first. When we talk about excellence in all we do, that's about elevating performance, right? There's a lot of ideas about what excellence is, but true excellence is a mindset. And it's a mindset of, every time I do something, I'm gonna do it better than the last time I did it. Every time I go out on the field or I go into the workplace, I'm gonna be better today than I was yesterday. And elevating performance is a mindset that really is the foundation of excellence. And that's what excellence looks like in action. And then when we talk about service before self, what that really means is that you lift others. You're not lifting yourself. You're gonna lift others before yourself every time, because you know that you're not the most important person in the room. It's the people that you're serving, the people that you're working with, or the people who work for you. Lifting others is the key to humility. It's the key to service before self. And that's the action that we would expect to see from someone that has that as a core value. So integrity first, service before self, excellence all we do, is manifest in living honorably, elevating performance, and lifting others. And that's what I wanted to see from the cadets. I wanted to see those actions. And we would talk about it, but I think the hardest part about that is, as a leader, you have to live it too. And there's a level of accountability there that's a little bit intimidating sometimes, because you're always on display and everyone's always watching you, but it's the life you live, and it's the burden that a leader has.
You know, we're all role models. You know, I kind of reminisce back to when Charles Barkley years ago said, you know, don't look at me, I'm not a role model. But in that aspect, we truly are. We're all role models. But one of the things I appreciate too that has kind of developed since we were there as cadets too is aspect of, if you do mess up, you make a mistake, you're not immediately kicked out. Right. There's a rehabilitation, or there's a process that you're going to go, if you can talk towards that too. So, and I'm kind of put this in the context of that leader out there that is developing leaders within their organization, that people are going to mess up. We're fallible, we're human. But what do you do? How do you continue to train them to be that person of honor when they do mess up?
Sure. No one's perfect. And we know that. Even as a leader, no one's perfect. But there's a couple things that are important. First of all, when you do make a mistake, or when that mistake happens, you have to own it and admit it, and ask for that forgiveness, and ask to be given the opportunity to rehabilitate. And then as leaders, you have to have enough grace to understand when is it okay to say, yeah, we can work with this person and we can try to rehabilitate them, or that mistake or crime was too much for us to be able to go forward with someone.
Yeah.
You know, most of the time for a cadet, we could figure out a way to help them to understand. And that's the beauty of it. That's how you learn the most, is from mistakes. At least it has been in my life. I wish I could say these things were innate in me and that I just did some of the things that I do. But even now, I still make mistakes. But I think one of the keys to your credibility is admitting when you made a mistake and own it, and then figure out how you're going to get better, how to elevate that performance so that you don't do it again. And then as a leader, remember that you're not perfect either. And when you're looking at people that do make mistakes, you have an obligation to try to help them get better and help them to move forward. And you're going to get a better leader from someone that has made mistakes and overcome them and learn lessons and is able to keep on moving. That, to me, at least in my case, I've made so many mistakes in my life. I've seen it all. And, you know, people tell me things that they've done. I'm like, don't think that you're the only one, you know? And it's funny when you're talking to a cadet or somebody that says they did something and they're coming in and they're talking to you about it, and you describe your journey to them and say, look, I've been there, I know, but you can get better and you can do better, and I'm gonna help you. A lot of credibility there, you know? People, it's hard to follow a perfect person. There's only one person that ever came on this planet that was perfect. And he's not here right now in the physical, but he's always there to help us to move forward and to have something to strive for.
You know, this is awesome. That more about you and your experiences. Now let's talk a little bit about your active duty career, 38 years.
Yeah.
Just give a quick synopsis of some of the different assignments that you've had over the year.
So like you, I started out as a pilot, and that was the dream come true for me. It was something that I wanted to do. I was a B-1 bomber pilot for most of my time. I flew trainers. I flew some command post work that I did, but bombers was where the majority of my flying was and where my combat experience was. So that was just amazing. And my time as a squadron commander was at least one of the top 2 or 3 experiences of my whole life. That was as much as being a coach as anything I've ever done. And it was just phenomenal. I also did some staff work. I worked in legislative liaison, where I was a liaison with Capitol Hill for the Air Force. I worked in the Pentagon a few times. That was a character development experience in itself. But I loved it because we were all in it and working hard to do good things for the folks that we knew, our fellow airmen and warriors and soldiers, sailors, Marines that were out there. We're trying to do things to help them execute their mission, but also to make their lives better. So I always felt a pretty good sense of purpose in the Pentagon, as painful as it was sometimes, because that policy world is tough. I also had some other commands. I commanded at the wing level, where I commanded an entire base. I commanded at what we call the numbered Air Force level, where I commanded all of the bomber units in the Air Force as the 8th Air Force Commander, which was just amazing to me. It's a historic unit from World War II, but that was incredible. And then I was the 3rd Air Force Commander, where I commanded the bases in Europe, all of our Air Force bases in Europe and Africa, actually. That was also a phenomenal experience to me. But then I wrapped it up at the Air Force Academy, which was just amazing. To come back full circle from where we were as young men and come back and be able to lead men and women at the Air Force Academy was just really special. There's one assignment that I left out that was actually pretty incredible, though. I was a defense attaché in Cairo, Egypt, and I did that for 2 years. And there was a coup d'etat while I was there. And some people say, oh my gosh, that must have been horrible. But actually, for my family and I, that was one of the best assignments we had. We loved living in Egypt. It was amazing. And then when the coup happened, it was a bit painful. My family had to evacuate because of the violence that was going on. But for me, professionally, it was amazing to work with a different country every day, face to face. And then I used to get briefings from the president on things that he wanted done. President Obama was president at that time. To me, that was incredible. So that would be second place to the Air Force Academy. And but having the opportunity to be the superintendent was just really an amazing way to close out my career and to give something back to the institution that gave so much to me.
That's awesome. Came full circle.
Yeah.
But I find it kind of challenging for people that are listening. One of your favorite assignments was actually when there was a coup d'etat.
I know. People are like, what's wrong with you?
Mentality.
I'm like, run to the sound of the fire, man. It was like,
run to the sound of the gun.
Here we go. And it was phenomenal. And what was really funny about it, when I got to Egypt, I didn't know anything. I had about 4 months advance before I had to be there. It was a short notice. I was a 2-star general at the time. And they said, look, we need you there. We're not going to be able to train you to be a defense attaché before you get there. But we're going to put you and your wife through anti-terrorism training. And then you're going to go. And I, Amy's like, we're going to do what? And she had to learn to shoot guns and drive defensively. And she was like, what have you gotten us into? And I was like, honey, it'll be fine. She's a warrior. And she did it. She hates guns, but she shot 7 or 8 different kinds of guns. She drove cars defensively, and they showed her how to get out of bad situations. I always respected her, and I always feared her a little bit, and I still do. But after that, I was like, okay, who are you? And she was awesome. And she went to Egypt and just ate it up. And our kids loved it. But when the coup happened, I felt like, man, the only thing I know how to do here is build relationships. And that was what I did when I hit the ground running, because they didn't really train me that well in actually being an attaché. But I went out in my first 6 months, I met almost every Egyptian general that was above the rank of 2-star that I could, and just started building those relationships. And when the coup happened, everybody was coming to me going, how do I talk to this general or that general or their chairman of defense? I knew this man, and he was phenomenal. I had his cell phone number in my phone. I didn't know a whole lot about the geopolitics of the situation, but I knew the people that I needed to know. And building those relationships was just key. And that's something we all learn, It's that classic situation where you lean on your strengths. And I knew that was something that I could do. So that was until I could really learn the mechanics of being a defense attaché. I just relied on relationship building and sort of using my wits in a situation, which are very slim anyway. But when the coup happened, I was really thankful that I had these relationships built. One time, Marty Dempsey was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I kid you not, I'm sitting in my office, and my executive officer says, sir, the chairman wants to speak to you. I was like, the chairman of what? And he said, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So I take the phone, and he's like, Rich, this is Marty Dempsey. I was like, oh, yes, sir. And so we started talking. He goes, I need to speak to the chairman of defense. Can you do it? And I said, sir, can I get about 5 minutes and maybe I can connect you? And I called him. General Sedke was his name. I called him on my cell phone. I said, hey, sir, can you speak to our chairman of defense? And he was like, well, sure, Rich. And so I connect these two guys up, and I was all of a sudden a hero for really doing nothing. But they were like, oh my gosh, but it was all about relationships. So I learned a lot in that job.
You bring up a great point that I think people miss out on. They get into kind of the weeds of leadership, of running a company, the X's and O's, the transactional stuff. But bottom line, it always comes down to the lowest common denominator: relationships. Mm-hmm. It's all about relationships.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can't emphasize that enough. That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. What a great experience too.
It was awesome. Kids loved it. Amy loved it. We would have stayed a third year, but they needed me to come back, so we came back.
So that training probably helps you drive around inner city here in Dallas.
Yeah, it helps Amy the most. I'm like, honey, cool down. You're not in Egypt now. Slow down,
She fits right in with everybody here. Let's kind of go back to this aspect of lessons learned on the gridiron. Now you're active duty. You've had all these different experiences. What things, other than the relationship building with your teammates that you referenced to, but what other lessons did you learn on the gridiron that transitioned or translated well to active duty for you?
Well, the things that you do as an athlete, preparing for every game, the preparation that you put into each game, but then the preparation that you put in before the season even starts. Your weight training, your endurance training, all the things that you do, your playbook and understanding the playbook and studying your opponent. Those are the kinds of things that you do in everyday life when you're out there in whatever discipline you're engaged in. But a lot of times I look back on, say, combat, right? When I was a squadron commander, we deployed to Iraqi freedom in 2003. And I had old squadron B1s, 24 aircraft and 24 air crew. And I talked to them like our coaches talked to us. It was like, guys, we're getting ready to do this. I mean, I had all these men and women that were about to engage. And it was a lot like a coach talks to a team about getting prepared, being ready to do it. And I would think about, I remember this one time I'm flying into Baghdad, and I have a young co-pilot. It was the first night of the war, lieutenant sitting next to me. And we get in there, and there's this barrage of anti-aircraft artillery in front of us, and it's just going up. And he goes, "Sir, what do we do about that?" And the first thing that came to my mind was, listen, you trained and practiced for this. It's time to put it to use. I need you to do this, all right? Are you ready? He's going, "Yes, sir. I got it. I got it." And it's like you would hear a coach say, if you're walking out against an old lineman well, you didn't probably have this problem, but an old lineman that was much bigger than you, and you're just going, "Oh man, I got this guy." And the coach is like, "Listen, we practiced for this. It's time for you to get out there and do it. Put your techniques into use. Make it happen. I need you to get it done." And that's the same way that I would talk to the lieutenants and the captains and the other folks on in our squadron before they went out and did something that they had never done before, but that they had trained and were practiced for and ready to do it. And they were fully equipped to do it. It was just a matter of giving them trust and confidence in their skills and their ability to go out and win. Get out there and do it. It's time to put the pads on. In this case, strap that airplane on and go.
Yeah. I remember a story that Mike Gould, our mutual friend who was our coach and former superintendent at the Air Force Academy too, talked about during 9/11. He was at NORAD, and he talked about that what his defensive back coach had always told him, don't get beat deep. You've heard him tell this story about on the West Coast. So think about what assets do we have on the West Coast in case we get hit on that side. So football translates to everything.
It does.
Football translates to everything.
We're biased. We
are biased. And also, I want to put out there too, I love the B1. I don't know if I've actually shared with you, I got a chance to fly that post playing for the Cowboys out at Dias.
Nice.
And that thing handled exactly like a fighter.
Yeah.
I mean, the fly-by-wire, it was phenomenal. It's like
great.
2 F-15s under each wing, right?
Yeah.
Or one F-15 under each wing. So it was
awesome.
Performance was awesome.
Especially when you're in combat, you're very happy to have that airplane.
Yeah.
Because it performs and it does what it's supposed to do.
That's awesome.
Great airplane. Great airplane.
Now I want to kind of get back to this aspect of building culture. For folks to listen in or to be able to relate, as an Air Force officer, you're basically changing assignments every 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. And when you go in there, you have to be able to put your thumbprint on it to impact culture, to bring the values, whatnot to it. Maybe you don't have to fix it from previous leadership, but how would you go about putting your thumbprint on that organization to lead either to pick up where the previous individual left off or to improve? Just kind of talk to that. How would you go about building culture within the organization?
Sure. Well, the first thing is you have to understand the organization that you're about to walk into. And you learn as much as you possibly can before you get there, but then you have to take a little bit of time once you arrive to really feel it and understand it. And a lot of that is about connecting with the people in the unit and understanding what their thoughts are about the unit, their perspective, their issues, And you have to take a little bit of time. I wish I could say that walking in the door, I was always ready and I always knew where I was going to take an organization. But I think that that's a mistake sometimes, because it's hard to know until you're on the ground and you actually see what's going on. Now, I will say you don't have a whole lot of time to do that, but have an idea going in, but then sort of validate or confirm that after you get there just a bit to understand really what you're up against. And I also think that you laying out your ideas, your values are really important. Your goals and your vision for the organization is going to be really key and critical, and you have to communicate that very early in your time. And then consistency throughout. You know, you may change, and there's times where that vision may change just a little bit, or those, you know, maybe there's different values that you need to emphasize, but communicate. You have to over communicate to your folks. You can't just say it once and think that that's going to stick in. If people are like me, I got to hear things like 4 or 5 times before I actually get it. But communicating that at all levels of the organization is critical, and you have to communicate it in different ways. Your more senior leaders, you know, maybe you have more intimate meetings where you're actually talking about how are we going to achieve this vision, and maybe they help you to craft it or shape it in a way that the organization can actually own. At the middle levels, maybe you're talking more about how they can communicate your vision to the people at the lower levels, and giving them ideas about ways to inculcate that throughout. And at the folks at the lower level, this is where I think senior leaders can really make a difference when you communicate directly to the people at the lower levels. You go out, you get out and about, you put some skin in the game, and you go see them, and you see them where they are, meet them where they are. But you tell stories, you give examples, you share yourself with them, and you got to open up. I mean, you can't be so insular that they don't know who you are, and understand that you really mean what you're saying and that you're owning it. And if they know that you own it and you're communicating it to them regularly and you continuously do that, eventually people start to understand where you want to take the organization. They start to buy in, and then you're all starting to move in the same direction. But I'll say this too, you have to also listen, because sometimes they may have other ideas about a better way or a different way. And I'm not always right. In fact, most of the time I'm not. And hearing what your people have to say is important. And the best part about that is when you hear something and you go, you know what, I think I'm going to do that. Tell people, I have decided we're gonna do this instead of that, because Betsy down in HR told me some things that I think are really important, and this is good, and I've heard it from others, and we're going to go in this direction. People will appreciate the fact that you're listening and that you're actually taking in what they're telling you, and that you're giving them ideas from all levels to take the team forward. It can't just be you. You got to move the team as a team. And so I just think being able to have those touch points at all levels of an organization and over communicate and be out there and make yourself available, approachable, is really key and critical to people.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And also the aspect I want to touch quickly on too here on leadership is overcoming obstacles. Mm. You know, Murphy's Law, whatever can go wrong will go wrong, right?
Oh, yeah.
You as a leader at the Air Force Academy probably had one of the biggest curveballs thrown at a leader, particularly in the military, COVID.
Oh yeah.
Leading through COVID. Just talk about that experience, how you were able to continue to lead, in essence, in a virtual world. I mean, that changed everything. I mean, what did you draw upon and what lessons did you learn to lead through that?
It was so hard, because I got there a little bit after the pandemic started. And when I got there, some things that had occurred. They actually had sent the cadets home for a while because they couldn't keep them at the academy together in such close quarters. And then they brought them back, and that's when I started. And my guidance from the Secretary of Defense was, as well as the other service academies, we're not sending cadets or midshipmen home again. They're going to stay at the academy, because really all the things that we had talked about earlier about that character development, because it wasn't just about their academics. We can do academics virtually, but character development, military training, those things have to be done in person. And so that made for a really tough scenario. And the cadets, there was periods where the peak of the pandemic on the campus was so bad that we had to keep them confined into the dormitory. And we developed a thing called the pandemic math team. So we had biologists, virologists, mathematicians who were professors at the academy. We even involved some cadets to help us understand how widespread the pandemic was at the academy based on tests that we could get, the COVID, the brain tickle, if you remember that. But we could have an idea of how bad it really was. And if it got to a certain point, we had to confine the cadets. Well, there got to be this one point where we had the cadets confined for weeks, and it looked like it was going to be even longer. And I had no idea what was going on in the dormitories. I was just like, what are they doing? What do they do all day? They're getting their classes on the computer. They're doing all their classes virtually, but they can't go outside. We were limiting in the gym. They had to eat their meals in the dormitories. And so I finally got to the point where I said, you know what? I'm going to go live in the dormitories. And I moved into the dorms for 40 days. It was like 37 days, something like that. And there's 40 squadrons, and I would just kind of hop around and go from squadron to squadron. And I took a cot, I took my toiletries, and took some uniforms, and I would go to work in the day. At night, I would leave work and I'd go straight into the dorms, and I'd pick a different squadron each time. And I learned more doing that, but it was grueling. I'll tell you, Amy saved me because I initially had a one each military cot that I was sleeping on. That worked for about 3 days. And Amy would come up every day and she would bring the dog. She'd bring my dog up and she would bake cupcakes. She baked 225 cupcakes every day. She would bring those to me. When I would leave work and go to the squadron, she would drive up there and we had to abide by all the COVID rules, but she would give me the dog. And we had this great dog, his name's Cairo, he's a golden doodle. And me and the dog would just hang out in the squadron with the cadets. And one day she brought me an arrow bed. Saved my life. I would still be crippled if she hadn't, but for 30 whatever days, I was just there. I would live there. She would bring me a change of clothes, that I would hang out or I'd be able to change into, and I would just be with the cadets. We'd be playing ping pong or chess, and whatever it was that they were doing, but I just needed to understand what's going on, what are their issues, how can I make this better, because they were struggling, and I was struggling, living there. Can't imagine what they were going through, and so understanding that and helping us to get through it, it gave me some ideas about policy changes that we could make and things that we could do to help make life a little better for them. The pandemic was just hard, but being there and having amazing people on our staff, the pandemic math team and all of the other leaders really helped us to get through it. But those 35 days, 37 days in the dorms was probably the best education that I could have gotten.
Man, what a great example of actually a leader getting their hands dirty. And I really appreciate you speaking down to all segments of those underneath your command, that young airman, an active, they need to see you.
Yeah.
They need to know that you care and that you're there. What a great testimony to you,
You bring
sir.
up a great point too. Not only did I learn things, but they did too, because they would go, sir, why is this happening? Or why this? And I would have like 40 cadets sitting around and I'm telling them why certain policies were in place. And they would go, oh, okay, now I understand. And when you're kind of inflicting some hardship on people, it makes it a lot easier when they understand the why behind it and the purpose behind it. That was probably the most valuable thing, is that I could talk to them about the things that we were doing and why we needed to do it.
That reminds me of a quote by Nietzsche who says that he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how.
That's perfect.
Amen.
It is. That is a great quote.
Now from active duty to the director of the college football playoffs. Making that transition, talk just briefly about some of the challenges that you had in making that transition, because you spent 38 years of your life, your whole professional career doing one thing, now something totally different.
It is completely different. And Very, very challenging, but I love it. And I love this transition. It came sort of out of nowhere. It goes back to relationships. And while I was still on active duty, I had met a person on a search firm. His name was Daniel Parker. And we were doing a search for the Mountain West Conference. I was on the committee for our commissioner, our conference commissioner. We ended up picking Gloria Navarez, who is our conference commissioner. But I got to know the leader of this search firm, just talking to him at lunch during the process. And a few months later, he called me, he said, "Hey, weren't you thinking about retiring pretty soon?" And I was like, "Why, yes, I am." And he said, "Would you want to put your name in the hat for this executive director position of the college football playoff?" I was like, "Well, yes, I do." And I put my name in the hat. I went through a few series of interviews. They had a large pool. They told me they wanted a non-traditional candidate, and that's who I was. And I said, "So as a non-traditional candidate, do I have a shot?" And he said, "Yeah, you have a shot." I said, "That's all I need. Give me a chance." And I went through the interviews, and I was blessed to be hired. But I retired from the Air Force on June 1st, and I started at the college football playoff on June 4th. And so it was a real fast move, a fast transition. Coming in the door, though, once again, it was my team. I am so blessed and so fortunate to have a great team at the CFP, at the college football playoff. There's only 29 people that actually do this, which shocked me for what that team does, but they were so incredible, and just meeting them and getting to know them, it was more about me adjusting to them and not them adjusting to me. And I had no choice in that matter because, again, I didn't really have a good idea, sort of going back to Egypt, what I was supposed to do and what the full gamut of duties that I had. But that team really helped me to learn and to understand what I needed to do and how I could help lead them to success. And it was just, I say I'm blessed. It's not something that I deserved, but something that I'm so grateful for. And being a part of the sport that did so much for me is just a dream come true. And people ask me sometimes, they go, "Is this a dream job that you had?" And I'm like, well, I would say that, but I didn't even know it existed. So I wasn't really dreaming about it. But now that I have it, I am living a dream. And it's largely because of the amazing team that I have. And again, the people that you get to work with and the relationships and the connections that you can make with the folks that are working for you and with you is everything.
Amen. So, I thought, from an outsider's perspective, I thought it was a phenomenal year. I thought the expanded playoff, with bringing more teams in, that it worked, and that I'm sure the viewership, everything was at all-time highs too. So, lessons learned for you in that aspect from this season. Can we expect any tweaks going into next year, if you can share them?
Well, what I'll share is the commissioners. I work for the 10 conference commissioners and the athletic director at Notre Dame. They form the board of the management committee, which is the committee that I work directly for and with. And they laid out this format, this 12-team format, knowing that it wasn't going to be perfect. But they did it in a way that included more teams and brought more teams that we had never seen involved in the playoff before, and teams that weren't in the hunt for the championship before, allowed them to be a part of this. They included all of the things in college football that people love, like the first round of the playoff was on campus. Those games were electric. They were just amazing. The quarterfinals and the semifinals are the bowl games. And you and I both know, we both played in bowl games, and they're special, and they bring the tradition of college football. They included conference champions that have an automatic bid into the playoffs. So there's a lot of aspects of college football that they put in, but they knew that it wasn't going to be perfect. But my guidance to my team was, we need to execute this in spectacular fashion, because any good organization knows you put your best foot forward, then you step back and you look at it and go, how do we get better? How do we elevate our performance? That's what excellence is all about. And so now we're going to look back, and the commissioners are going to do the same and say, what can we do now to make it better? What did we learn from this first round? We executed it as good as we possibly could have. Now, how do we make it even better? And so there's a lot of things, as far as who gets buys into the game, what are the automatic qualifications, did we get that right? Are the campus games what we needed them to be? There's a lot of different aspects of this, even back to the selection committee, the folks who pick the teams. How do we change that? How do we make it better? And a lot of things they'll leave the same, I'm sure, but there's going to be some tweaks that they're going to make, and I'll be a part of those discussions. But ultimately, it's a vote that the commissioners take to make these changes, and we'll see how it all goes. But they're all very experienced in college sports and athletics and media and all the things that are involved in football. So I'm looking forward to it. And like any good organization, continuous development, continuous process improvement is what we have to do. I call it elevating performance. Some organizations call it process improvement. It's the same mindset, and we're taking that mindset.
Well, I tell you, as a fan, I'm looking forward to next August when the college football season kicks off here again. Want to do a little transition here. Talk more into this aspect of character and leadership development. I appreciate what you said earlier regarding excellence. Excellence is a mindset, and identity. People think so many times that they relate identity with what you do. What you do does not define who you are. Right. So I'm going to give you a kind of a working definition for excellence, living excellence and identity, and I want to kind of work off of that from you. For me, I define excellence as having a clearly defined identity, who you are as a person, and then live each day with character and purpose. I mean, very similar to what you've alluded to, and for your experience at the academy, and then coming up through active duty Air Force. So with that, I want to just ask you, who is Rich Clark? I mean, you've danced around it, you've alluded to a little bit before, but from an identity perspective, who is Rich Clark?
Well, first and foremost, I mentioned before, my faith is most important to me, and my relationship with God and my Lord Jesus Christ, that is the most important in my life. The next thing, though, is my wife, Amy, and my kids, Milo and Zoe. So being a man of faith, being a great husband, a great dad, are the three things that are most important to me. If I can get those things right, to me, that is the identity that when I die, I want those to be on my tombstone. Now, the other things that I do in life, though, I can be very passionate about, like you, and they're important to me because I don't want to do anything halfway. If I'm going to be involved in it, I'm going all in. And even though there are certain things that are the higher priority for me, that doesn't mean that I'm not leaning into everything else that I'm doing and giving it all I have. If you're going to commit to something, you got to go all in and commit and commit to getting better every time, commit to giving it everything that you've got. So I would say that the other thing that I would take into my my tombstone or my obituary: never quit, never gave up, never stopped trying to get better, never got discouraged by hard times, and never let adversity take him down, but he kept driving all the time, every time. And that's something that's really important to me.
Again, man, I appreciate that so much, because it's that aspect. People often say that excellence it's the destination, but it's not a destination. It's a journey.
It sure is.
It's a process. It's taking that thing, being your best self every day, encouraging others to do the same in the organizations or associations that you're affiliated with, encourage them to rise to a higher noble purpose or cause. That's one of the things I got from the Center for Character Leadership Development at the Air Force Academy.
Yes. And
so, with that, defining success, how would you define success in that regard?
I think it goes back to the core values that we talked about, right? Live honorably, lift others, and elevate performance. And I think it's hard to put a quantitative number or measure on what success is. I think, like you just said, success is about every day doing those things and living that life that defines you and who you are and who you want to be. And so I guess if I was going to put three qualitative measures on myself, it would be, did he live honorably every day in everything that he did? Did he lift others at every opportunity, even before himself, but try to make others better and help them be their best possible selves? And did he elevate performance? Was he always trying to get better and always trying to lift the performance of his team in every way that he could? Elevating performance is critical. And I think if those three things, if I do those every day, like if I look back at the end of the day or the end of the week or the month or the year, and eventually my lifetime, if I did those things, those would be the qualitative measures that I would put on myself. And if I could look back and say, I did those things and I did them to the glory of God, then I'll call it a win.
Man, that's awesome. And another mic drop moment for you there, and that's a great way to kind of wind down this conversation. Rich, man, I appreciate you so much. Coming here, spending time with us, sharing your story with those folks that are listening in. So, I appreciate you, and tell Amy thank you for allowing us to spend some time with us here, for sharing us with us.
Well, she was excited that we were getting together.
Yeah.
She was like, oh, Chad's so nice. You've done so many things for me all the time. You come speak to my squadrons, my wing. I'm honored to be able to come and be here with you today. So thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you. And for you folks out there that are listening in, if you like this content, if you like what you've heard, follow us on social media. And also, if you want to learn a little bit more about this podcast and what we're trying to accomplish and achieve, go to my website, chadhennings.com, where you can learn more about everything that we're trying to accomplish and the impact that we're wanting to have on our community and on our nation and our world today. So appreciate you. Thank you for joining us. Check us out next time.